Oh, was. Can I start? Okay. Hey guys, we're Francisco. No, okay. Yeah, hello. What do you guys see in this image, in this beautiful image?
Disparity, Mumbai.
Mumbai. No. Almost there.
I think it's Amani's house and then yeah, exactly.
Oh Lord. Okay. Okay, guys, yes. We see a lot of disparity, we see a lot of inequality, we see a lot of, well, rich people's houses. This image is used in basically every book of geography in Brazil. And it's an image that represents São Paulo, a city in Brazil. And it shows a bit of the inequality that there is in the country. So as you can see, it's a slum area here with a very, very low development. And in here, we have another area that is occupied by very, very, very rich people and with a very high development. In Brazil, this area is recognized with the Human Development Index, the same as Sierra Leone, which is the lowest country, the country with the lowest HDI in the world. And this part of the city has the same HDI as Switzerland, which is one of the highest in the world. So as you can see, a single wall can compare two very different worlds within the same society. And we can also talk about inequality in different aspects, in different spheres, and in different ways. This not only represents economic inequality, but it also represents social inequality. It represents several types of a system of oppression that doesn't allow people to develop themselves. So right now, we're gonna ask ourselves a little question. Does development always lead to inequality? Is that something that we believe in? Do we believe that development, which is generally defined by the IB, and I'm going to get to the definitions very soon, lead to this inequality that we see in the picture? Is the only way for us to have a development in society to also indirectly provide inequality? We're now going to define some of the key terms in the question. So development is defined by the IB as the increase in the standard of living. And that can be either through health, either through education, either through economy, either through the social well-being of the population. There are several ways of looking at development, but in the general term, it means increasing the standard of living. And it means making sure that people are well-fed, economically thriving. And then we have the term inequality. Inequality talks about how there are systems that don't allow people to have the same resources or the same conditions to achieve that development. So we can talk about inequality when we're talking about different countries. We can talk about inequality when we're talking about the same society. And we can talk about inequality in several different ways and in several different forms of development. So as I was showing in the image before, there is an economic inequality very clear in that picture, but there's also other types of development and other types of inequality that comes with different types of development. Today, we're going to focus on two different types of development. We're going to focus on economic development and social development. And we're going to talk about the two types of inequality that are associated with these types of development.
Okay, so first off, we have economic inequality. And economic inequality can be defined as a gap in income or wealth within a country or economy. Economic inequality can be shown to have increased in the recent years in the most populous country, which have recently developed. For example, India, China, or the US. The economic inequality is measured by something called a Gini index. So let's see what a Gini index is. So basically, Gini coefficient is used to measure economic inequality in the country. So for example, we take USA. So the Lorentz curve represents the economic inequality in US. And if the Lorentz curve moves towards 0, which is the line of equality, and represents maximum equality, it means that the country has more economic equality. But if the Lorentz curve moves towards 1 or 100%, then it shows that it has maximum inequality. So basically, a Gini coefficient of 0 expresses perfect equality, while 1 or 100% expresses economic inequality. Now, I want you guys to go to Google and search the Gini coefficient of your countries. And tell me. Tell me.
0 or 1, 0 to 1 or 0
Or 100%. Anyone? That's so much. Wait. 67 point?
4.3. That was most recently measured in 2011.
Anyone? Come on.
33.
Which word? No, I know. I swear to God, I'm glitching. No, how much? 33.
Sorry, 0.1.
Yeah, I think that's enough. So we can see, for example, Bangladesh, India, Peru, they have very high Gini coefficient, which means that the Lorentz curve is closer to the line of basically 100%. It's closer to 100%, which is economic inequality is very high in these countries. Now, we take the example of, for example, US. Lovely. So in US, the Gini coefficient is 0.49 or 49, which is quite high as well. And we can see that US, despite being a developed country, has a very high Gini coefficient. It leads to the question that how has development increased economic inequality in US? So we see that, okay, let me change. So, okay, yes. Monopolies. The increase in capitalism in the US has given rise to the creation of monopolies. So monopolies in American history are large companies that have control of an industry or a sector, which allows them to control the prices of the goods and services they provide. So despite having one of the largest number of millionaires and billionaires in the country still has a very high Gini coefficient, which represents that the gap between the rich and the poor has increased a lot, and it still keeps increasing as like monopolies such as IT industries and big industries get more power. People, billionaires and millionaires who are already rich people get richer, and poor people get poorer. So development in the US has caused the emergence or solidification of political elites who use their position to accumulate disproportionate amounts of power, creating inequalities, including economic inequality, but not limited to it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the Nordic model. The Nordic model consists of a model which countries follow, which are Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. And just like Juvika just was talking about, we have a Gini coefficient, right? So this is displayed by a Lorentz curve, where this line would mean a Gini coefficient of 0, which means total equality. And if we look at the Nordic model, they would be around here, I guess, which would mean a 0.25 on the Gini coefficient, which again displays that these countries have high living standards and low income disparity, and they're one of the most lowest economically unequal countries in the world. So the Nordic model is a combination of the free market capitalism added with social benefits that give the citizens of these countries top quality services, and such as free education, good healthcare, and pensions, which are paid by like retirees. And these are all funded by taxpayers. So when we look at the citizens, they have a high degree of trust in the government. And we can see this through a lens of, if we look at the history. If we look at the history, there's a shared history, and there's societal development, which is credited to the success. Unlike areas that develop around large corporate-owned farms, the history, okay, let me skip this part. Basically, if we talk about the advantages of the Nordic model yields of equality and social mobility. Everyone has free access to decent public services, including, again, the education and the healthcare. And it was also seen as somewhere between capitalism and socialism, which has been termed as Caudely capitalism. So would this model be sustainable for the future? There are fears of aging population and globalization, with also growing immigration that will gradually tear apart the welfare state of the Nordic model. The taxes can only increase to a certain extent, and it will always risk a more individualistic culture that will begin to evolve. So would a Nordic model work for other countries? Well, it has created much discussion about the pros and cons of the Nordic model. And many people often refer it back to the American model, which Jovika just was talking about, where capitalistic enterprises can be seen as attractive and this can be seen as an alternative of the winner takes all approach, which is seen in the US. And it can see that there's more focus on societal needs. So the critics of the American model point out that public services basically this is the Nordic model. Then from the Nordic model, we can go into the neo-Marxist theory, which is an economic theory which says that the current world's economic system has been structurally implemented by the use of global class and global class division, in which developed countries seem to be exploiting other countries, such as industrialized nations, which are seen as less developed countries. Neo-Marxism is often described as the opposition to inequalities experienced by the underdeveloped countries in the world. So if we look at neo-Marxism, it can be seen that imperialism is responsible for underdevelopment, and neo-Marxism emphasizes the cultural aspects of class conflict rather than economic factors, which focus on Karl Marx's original writings. So there are three factors which can be seen under neo-Marxism, which first would go into underdevelopment, then into dependency, and into the world system, which I'll further explain with the world system theory. So if we talk about underdevelopment, in neo-Marxism, you can see that the world is divided into underdeveloped countries and developed countries, where developed countries are responsible for the underdeveloped countries. Further, we can look at dependency, which falls into the dependency theory, which can be shown by this picture, where there will always be a dependency of the underdeveloped countries to the developed countries. And then lastly, we can talk about, here, so you can see the dependency theory of how this will go further into the world system theory. So I'll first talk about the world system theory. So this is basically the world system theory, where we can see that there's a division between countries, which is divided into the core countries, the semi-peripheral, how do you say that? Periphery countries, and periphery countries. And the question which I will basically ask you guys today is, if you look at this map, you can all see your own countries. And why do you think your country falls into the world system theory that it's in one of these categories? Anyone? Why do you think your country is a core country? What does it mean to be a core country? What does it mean to be a semi-periphery country? Yes.
So my country, there's like it's showed like semi-periphery. That's all because now my country is a periphery country, and basically it means that is exchanging resources in a way that is exploited with poor countries, such as some countries in Europe, United States, Canada, and Australia. So my country is giving cheap resources and cheap, let's say cheap labor as well, for example, in exchange for expensive industrialized resources that provide other countries like USA, Canada.
Anyone else want to talk about their country? Yeah.
So I think my country belongs to periphery because that's not my country separate. Okay. Yeah, it's first of all it's very small and it has a lot of influence by, let's say, more powerful countries. The country has a very good geostrategic location. That is why, like, let's say, the European Union and the US are interested in it. Otherwise, the country usually makes decisions that are like, led to them either by the US or the EU. It's not like the country makes the decision on their own. So maybe that's why one reason why it's not really a poor country, because it does not influence the other countries.
Well.
Yeah, so my country is a core country. I mean it's because our economy is based on exportation, which goes back with centuries. So like we also because of the martial law, but yeah, it's a core country because our economy is based on exportation of other countries, and so our economy wouldn't survive or wouldn't be as strong because our as exported.
Yeah, so exactly what Merle is saying, we can also see this in the US, for example, where it benefits unequally from economic and political exchanges from, for example, Kenya or Brazil. And yeah, that is the world system theory in a nutshell, I guess.
All right, so now we're gonna dive into social inequality. And this is a very important factor for social development. One reflects another one. And for starting this, I wanna ask you guys, have you witnessed something in your country that is related to social inequality? Something that you've seen or that you know in another country? Yeah, Tambi? Class system, okay. Someone else? Yeah.
I mean, my examples are it's more we restructure more social security system because what we have at the moment it kind of needs to like keeping people in unemployment and kind of like compared to other people in country. And so now we're restructuring everything. It's not like for my country compared, everyone's like they're way more extreme examples.
Being forced to child labor.
Okay. Yep. So social inequality can be objectively defined as the condition to unequal access to these benefits of belonging to any society. And it has already been seen here how it can affect by racial, gender, religious factors, or caste system, for example, in India. And so for this presentation, we're just gonna cover gender equality. And it can be defined as the equal access of opportunities regardless of your gender. This is something that reflects social development and has positive repercussions on the living conditions of the population and its politics. For example, the case study of Rwanda. After the 1994 genocide, women took an important role in stabilizing the country. The country has framed a strong educational program that encourages equality. In 2008, the Rwanda Chamber of Deputies was the first elected national parliament where women were the majority. The global average of women to men proportion is 26%, while today in Rwanda is 61.25%, which is why it is ranked in the top 5 countries in the world for gender equality, according to the Global Gender Gap Report. And this, yeah.
So now, for what you've all been waiting for, of course, we have Iran. So Arturo said how gender equality can maybe raise development, or in another perspective, development can lead into gender equality. I'm going to talk about, of course, how gender inequality decreases development, or how a lower development raises gender inequality. So as you can all know, and you can all see here actually, women in Iran don't have that many rights. And actually, when I say Iran, I mean a lot of Middle Eastern countries or even West African countries. Now, how does that actually affect development? First of all, because of the pressure it has on the society, the government, first of all, or the state loses legitimacy. And therefore, we can see how the development in a country decreases. Second of all, women overall in the entire world, in a country, in the school, represent basically somewhere around half of the society. And when you don't give right to the half of the society, that means half of the society is sad. Therefore, we can see how the half of the society are not actually working with the government transparently to achieve something good or higher, you know, a justice in the society, something like that. Therefore, it overall decreases development in a society. In the other perspective, however, what we are going to discuss now, which is very interesting, is, wow, how is inequality leading to development? I don't know if any of you can catch it, but like in the start, we said how development leads to inequality. Now we are, okay. So does anyone have any idea of that, Paolo? Anyone?
Maybe if I look from the perspective of having like a balance of, not a balance, but like rich class dominating the country, maybe there is this one person who is or a small percentage of people who is earning a lot more than the other people. So there is of course disparity within the economy. There is of course disparity within the economy. However, at some point, there are possibilities that the country is, for example, if I take India, there has been like developmental projects all over. There has been like new highways being built and all. But the funding of all this, whatever the political parties are getting in terms of taxes, is coming from the 1% rich community. So somehow inequality is leading to the funding of the development of the country, maybe structural, or if you look at from the perspective of maybe other inequalities, so also because a particular section is dominating over the other, so it somehow leads to less perspectives being going out and less problems being created maybe.
The very low wages, child labor, and lack of workers' rights in the garments industry in Bangladesh did project them as the second largest exporter of garments in the world and is a big contributor to their economy. So while it is very immoral and the inequality does directly lead to the very exponential development of Bangladesh.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you. So if you looked carefully and catched it, we did a paper too in this presentation. We started with the introduction and then we covered all the points. And this itself could be a paper 2, which I invite Francisco to do it for us.
So, inequality does lead to development because, as we said, in some ways, the oppression of people lead to economic development, which I don't fully agree with, just to be clear. But yes, inequality does lead to development when we're talking about social development, mostly because the existence of an inequality, just like in Iran, leads to people wanting and society naturally going for a balance. And that balance comes out of protest, civil unrest, and social movements that require and ask for social equality in the country. That's what we're seeing right now with the protests in Iran, women coming out in the streets and burning their hijabs and asking for the diminishment of punishments from the moral police in Iran. And that's how that leads to development. In conclusion, and to finish our little paper 2, we're going to have to talk about we're going to go over everything that we talked about. In the beginning, we set and we defined the terms that we have in the question. So the question was, how does development lead to inequality? Does development always lead to inequality? The 2 key terms there, and the 2 key terms per the IB guidelines, is development and inequality. We've defined both of the terms because development is basically the rise in the standard of living, and that can mean economically, socially, politically, in several ways. And inequality is the unequal distribution of resources for people to be able to develop themselves equally. After that, we gave 2 examples of 2 different types of development. First of all, economic development. We did it through the US with Yuvica. And then we showed how the US is also an example of a country that is unequal in its development. After that, we showed a counterclaim with the Nordic countries with Ashley, because that's an example of a region of the world that it's very developed economically, but at the same time, very equal economically. Their Gini index is usually very well below the 30. After that, we talked about social inequality and social development. Social development being the example of Rwanda, with the development of the parliament and with the rise in the role of women after the civil war that happened in Rwanda, in which the UN had to step in, and the importance of the role of women in developing the country and making it more stable in one of the rising economies in Africa in the 21st century. After that, we talked about our counterclaim about how not always development will lead to social equality, and that's the example of Iran. But, however, looking at it from another perspective, we can always say that Iran, yes, is an unequal country when it comes to social development, but it is coming now to a more balanced situation because of the civil unrest protests. So yes, in a way, when we flip the question, we can see another perspective, which it can also count as a counterclaim. Not always we have to go through a perspective that is completely different from the one that we said before. We can always look at it from another perspective. And in conclusion, now we have to go back to the question and answer the question. So does development always lead to inequality? The answer to this question is a bit more tricky. In some cases, yes, it does. It does lead to an inequality, but socially, and when we're talking about the way that societies organize themselves, there are more examples to show that societies will search for a balanced situation more than an unbalanced situation. So in that way, there is always a reaction from the civil society to make sure that there is a more balanced point of equality. And the example that we gave for that is exactly the Iran protests that are happening right now around the world. And that was our paper 2, and that was our presentation about inequality. Thank you so much.